She was 20 years old, and on that gray October morning in 1934, she owned exactly $7, one small trunk, and a piece of paper that everyone in 3 counties agreed was worthless. Her stepmother had made sure of it. Vivian Whitfield closed the account like a bank teller closing a ledger. Clean, precise, cold, the house went to her, the store went to her, every dollar Thaddeus Whitfield had ever earned. Hers, and to his only daughter Cordelia, 4.5 acres of rock and thorn, up in the Blue Ridge. A field so poor the neighbor called it Whitfield's Waste, a final insult, wrapped in legal paper, tied with a ribbon of silence. Cordelia didn't cry, didn't argue, just took the deed, folded it into her coat pocket, and walked out the door before sundown. But here's what Vivian didn't know, what she couldn't have known. Beneath the northern corner of that useless field, under a flat stone no one had touched in 75 years, Cordelia's father had left her something else, something he had traveled all the way to a mountain town to hide, 10 years before he died, something that would change everything. And when Cordelia found it on the third day of the coldest autumn of her life, she would understand. The waste was never the waste. The waste was the gift. The house on Larkspur Lane had always smelled like lavender. Cordelia remembered that, even now, even 11 years later. Standing in the parlor of her father's home in a coat too thin for October, she could still catch the ghost of it, faint, sweet, buried under Vivian's harsh French perfume. Her mother had grown lavender by the south wall long ago. Adelaide Bellamy Whitfield, dead at 32, buried on a Tuesday in April 1923 in a plot the Ladies' Aid Society had paid for because Thaddeus was too broken to think about coffins. Cordelia had been 9 years old. She remembered the last thing her mother did. Not the last thing she said, the last thing she did. Adelaide had reached under her pillow. Slow, weak. Her hand had come out holding something small, a wooden finch, carved by some old man in the mountains her father used to buy wool from. The kind of carving that fits in a child's palm and no one else's. Take it, her mother had whispered. It's yours now. Cordelia had taken it. Cordy, listen. Adelaide's eyes were shining. God sent you to me. Now he's sending me on, but he'll walk with you. You hear me? Cordelia had nodded because she didn't know what else to do. When you can't find him, look for him in the dirt, in the trees, in the hands of people who work. That's where he lives. Then Adelaide had closed her eyes. And that was that. The finch was in Cordelia's pocket right now. 11 years later. Same coat pocket. Different girl. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Prescott. Thin man. Yellow fingers. Voice like a rake dragged across a gravel. The last will and testament of Thaddeus Wingate Whitfield, he said. Executed the 17th of June, 1933. Vivian sat across the table. Black silk. Perfect posture. Hands folded like she was in church. She hadn't looked at Cordelia once, not once. Not when Cordelia walked in. Not when Cordelia sat down. Not when Mr. Prescott offered his condolences, and Cordelia had to say thank you through a throat full of glass. The parlor clock ticked. Cordelia watched Vivian's hands because you could tell everything about a person by their hands. Grandpa Ezra had taught her that. Vivian's hands were still, too still, like she'd already been to this meeting, already knew the ending. To my beloved wife, Vivian Adair Whitfield, Mr. Prescott read, I bequeath the residence at 214 Larkspur Lane, the Whitfield Dry Goods Store on Main, all bank accounts, all household effects, and the entirety of my personal estate. Vivian nodded once, barely. To my daughter, Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield. A pause. Cordelia's hand closed around the finch in her pocket. I bequeath the parcel of land situated in Ashe County, North Carolina, in the parish of Fenwick, known locally as Whitfield's Waste, being 4.5 acres, to be hers in perpetuity. Mr. Prescott slid a folded deed across the table. Cordelia looked at it, then at Vivian. And Vivian finally looked back. Gray eyes, cool as a well. Not cruel, not angry, worse than that, satisfied. Your father wanted you to have something of the family history, Vivian said. Voice like linen sheets, smooth, cold. The deed transfers cleanly. I've already had it registered under your name at the county office, as required. Cordelia said nothing. 'Cause it was strange, wasn't it, for Vivian to have already done that? Fast, efficient, as if she wanted to be certain on paper that no thread tied her to that field. Vivian said, Your trunk is packed. It's by the service door. Still nothing. You have until sundown, Cordelia. Sundown, not tomorrow, not the end of the week. Sundown. Cordelia looked down at her father's signature on the will. Thaddeus Wingate Whitfield, the looping T, the proud W. She had seen him sign 1,000 receipts with that same hand. She had watched him lick his thumb and turn ledger pages with that same hand. She had held that hand at her mother's grave. That hand was in the ground now. She stood up, took the deed, folded it once, small, neat, slid it into her coat pocket, right next to the Finch. She did not say goodbye. She did not say thank you. She inclined her head half an inch toward Mr. Prescott. Because he was old, and he was tired, and none of this was his fault. And she walked out. The trunk was where Vivian said it would be, right by the service door, which was the door the delivery boys use, the door the coal man used, the door that led out to the alley behind the kitchen, not the front door. Cordelia noticed. She noticed everything now. The way you notice everything when the ground gives out beneath you. She lifted the trunk. It was lighter than she expected. Vivian had been merciful in one way. She had packed only what was strictly Cordelia's. 2 dresses, a wool nightgown, a hairbrush, a tin cup, a small book of pressed flowers Adelaide had made when she was a bride, and wrapped in a linen handkerchief at the very bottom, Grandpa Ezra's hand trowel, the trowel his own father had used before him. Handle worn smooth as a river stone, iron blade oiled and sharpened last spring by Grandpa's own hand 3 days before he died. Cordelia touched the handle through the linen, and for 1 second, just one, she almost broke, because Grandpa Ezra would have known what to do. Grandpa Ezra would have told her something practical, something with dirt in it. But Grandpa Ezra was in the same cemetery as Adelaide now. Cordelia straightened. She closed the trunk. She walked out into the alley behind the only house she had ever lived in, and she did not turn around, not once. Never curse a stone Cordy. It's just a piece of the world waiting for its proper place. That's what Grandpa Ezra used to say. He was a tenant farmer, rented 40 acres from the Ashford estate for 38 years, never owned a foot of ground in his life. But he understood dirt the way a preacher understands scripture. He'd take Cordelia out at dawn, 9 years old, 10 years old. Small hands, big questions. See that he'd point at a patch where nothing grew but sorrel and wiregrass. Soil's sour there, sweet it with lime, give it 3 years, it'll feed you. How do you know? Because the ground tells you if you listen. He would kneel down, take up a pinch of dirt, rub it between his thumb and forefinger like he was checking the weight of good cloth. Then he would hold it out to her. You smell that? It smells like dirt, Grandpa. No, it smells like tomorrow's biscuits, if you know what to do with it. Cordelia would laugh. Grandpa would smile, slow, weathered. Land's like people, Cordy, he told her once. She must have been 12. They were mending a stone wall on the north field. Everybody wants the easy ones, the pretty ones. Rich bottomland. Willow saplings, girls with pink cheeks. But the hard ones, the stony ones, those are the ones with the treasure inside. What treasure? I had straightened up, wiped his hands on his overalls, looked at her a long time. The kind you have to earn. Then he'd handed her another stone, and they had gone back to work. He died in his sleep 3 months before her 16th birthday. Vivian had not let her go to the funeral. Vivian had said it wasn't proper for a young lady to spend a whole day at a tenant farmer's burial, even if he was blood. Cordelia had gone anyway. She had walked 11 miles, in the rain, and she had stood at the back of the churchyard while they lowered him down. And she had promised him, silently, standing in the mud. I heard you, Grandpa. I heard every word. She had walked 11 miles back that night. Vivian had locked the door. Cordelia had slept in the woodshed. The bus station at Ashwood was 3 miles from Larkspur Lane. Cordelia carried the trunk. It got heavier with every mile. Her arms burned, her back ached. She switched hands every 100 steps, counting under her breath the way Grandpa taught her to pace out a field. The $7 were in her glove. Not her pocket, her glove. Because you never put your money where a thief could find it easy. Grandpa had taught her that too. The station smelled like diesel and old coffee. The clerk was a heavy woman with a sympathetic mouth and no time for sympathy. Cordelia asked for a one-way ticket to Fenwick. Fenwick, the woman frowned. Fenwick up in Ashe County. Yes, ma'am. Honey, there's not much up there. I know. The woman looked at her for a moment. At the trunk, at the coat, at the young face that was trying very hard not to be a young face. $2.40. Cordelia peeled a bill and coins out of her glove, counted them twice, slid them across the counter. Bus leaves in 40 minutes. Bench outside. Thank you. She sat on the bench. The sky was the color of dishwater. She opened her trunk halfway. Just a crack. Reached in, touched the linen handkerchief that held the trowel, just to know it was there. Then she closed the trunk, and she waited. The bus was a rattling thing. Green paint peeling from the sides. It smelled of tobacco and wet wool and other people's lives. Cordelia found a seat by the window, set her trunk between her knees, wrapped her arms around it like it was a child. The bus climbed. Piedmont fell away. Farmland gave over to hills. Hills gave over to mountains. The trees turned harder and thinner. The stone walls started Long, snaking lines of gray fieldstone winding up the slopes like the bones of some old, long-buried creature. Cordelia watched. She watched the way Grandpa had taught her to watch, not for prettiness, for information. She noted the sheep. She noted the roofs. She noted which chimneys were smoking and which were cold. She noted the way the smoke bent sideways in the wind. Told her something about how hard that the winter was going to be up here. Hard. That was what the smoke said. Hard. She thought of Vivian's dry, warm parlor, the lavender ghost of her mother, the seat by the fireplace where her father used to read the paper on Sunday afternoons. She would never sit in that seat again. She would never smell that lavender again. She would never stop. She stopped herself. Because Grandpa Ezra's voice was in her ear, steady, low. Sentiment is a luxury, Cordy. Observation is a tool. She lifted her chin. She kept watching. There was a woman across the aisle, 60 maybe, 65, wearing a hat that had seen better decades and a coat mended at both elbows. She was reading a small black Bible. Her lips moved, but she made no sound. Every few minutes she would turn a page. Her thumb was creased with permanent ink. She caught Cordelia looking. She smiled, kind, not pitying. You headed far, dear. Fenwick. Oh, Fenwick. The woman closed her Bible on her finger. That's a good ways yet. You got people up there? No, ma'am. The woman studied her. Work, land, land. The woman's eyebrows went up. Whose land but mine? The woman blinked. Then she leaned forward an inch, just an inch, but everything in her posture had shifted. Honey, say your name. Cordelia Whitfield. The Bible slipped a little in the woman's lap. Whitfield. She said it like she was tasting it. Your daddy, Thaddeus. Cordelia's breath caught. Yes, ma'am. Lord have mercy. The woman pressed her palm flat against the Bible. Lord have mercy on us all. You knew my father. I knew of him. Everybody in Fenwick did. For about 6 weeks in the autumn of 1924, she looked out the window a long moment, then back at Cordelia. You go see Pastor Whitmore first thing. You hear me before you go to that field. Before you do anything else, you go find Pastor Whitmore at the Methodist Church on Church Street. You tell him who you are. Why? The old woman looked at her, and her eyes were wet. Because that man has been waiting for you for 10 years, child, and he's not getting any younger. She would not say another word. She opened her Bible. She kept reading. And Cordelia Whitfield stared out the window at the mountains coming closer. Her heart pounding. Her mind racing. 1924. Her mother had been dead 1 year. Her father had married Vivian 6 months before. And in the autumn of that same year, without telling anyone, Thaddeus Whitfield had come up to a mountain town in Ashe County that no one in the family had ever mentioned. Why, she pressed her hand against her coat pocket. Felt the deed, felt the Finch. Why, Papa? Fenwick was smaller than she had imagined. One main street, muddy at the edges, a hardware store, a post office, a bakery with a wooden sign that said Delaney and Son in white paint that was flaking, a blacksmith's forge at the far end, smoke rising steady from its chimney even at 4 in the afternoon. And halfway down the street, a small stone church with a white spire. The Methodist Church. Just like the woman on the bus had said. Cordelia set her trunk down on the boardwalk in front of the church. Her arms were shaking. Her legs were shaking. She had eaten half a biscuit at 9 o'clock this morning. It was almost 5 now. The mountains were pulling the sun down behind them. Fast. Faster than in the lowlands. She climbed the church steps, pushed the door open. The sanctuary smelled like beeswax and cold wood. Empty pews. Empty pulpit. A single candle burning in a red glass by the altar. Somewhere in the back, a door opened. Hello. The voice belonged to an old man. Round shoulders, white collar, white hair, glasses that slipped down his nose. He was carrying an armful of hymnals like a mother carrying a child. Are you Pastor Whitmore? He stopped walking. He set the hymnals down on the nearest pew. Slowly. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been praying for so long he has almost stopped believing. Say your name, child. Her throat locked. She had to force the words out. Cordelia Whitfield. My father was Thaddeus. The pastor closed his eyes. His lips moved. She realized after a moment that he was praying. Just a whisper. Just thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Then he opened his eyes, and he smiled at her. A trembling smile. An old man's smile. And he said, Child, I have something in my desk that has been waiting for you for 10 years. Come with me. The office was small. A desk. 2 chairs. A window with a view of the graveyard behind the church. Bookshelves stuffed with more books than the shelves could hold. A framed print of the Good Shepherd on the wall. Pastor Whitmore sat down heavily. He pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk. He took out a metal box, locked. He fumbled a small brass key out of his vest pocket. His hands were shaking now. He opened the box. Inside were 3 things. In an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax, a small leather-bound Bible. Old, a ribbon marker still in it, and underneath both a folded piece of paper that looked like a bank draft. The pastor lifted the envelope, held it a moment, then held it out to her. Your father brought this to me in October of 1924. He stayed in Fenwick 3 days. He walked the parish, he asked questions, he looked at deeds down at the county office. He came here on the third night, sat where you're sitting, and he handed me this envelope. Cordelia took it. Her father's handwriting was on the front. For my daughter Cordelia, if she ever comes to Fenwick alone. Her hand shook so badly she almost couldn't break the seal. I don't understand, she whispered. I know, said Pastor Whitmore. But read it, child. He wrote it for you. She opened the envelope. The paper crackled. 10 years old. Kept dry. Kept safe. Kept. Her father's handwriting filled 2 pages. She read it out loud. Because she needed to hear his voice. Because reading it silently would be like burying him a second time. My dearest Cordelia. If you are reading this, then I have died and left you unprotected in a house I could not free from Vivian's hand while I lived. Forgive me, my girl. I was not brave enough to fight her in life, but I have been fighting her quietly since the moment I understood what I had married. The parcel of land in Fenwick called Whitfield's Waste is not what it appears to be. It is the last piece of a much larger inheritance our family once held. My great-great-grandfather, Jeremiah Whitfield, built a stone cellar there in the year 1859, in the years of trouble before the war between the states. He hid our family's savings there. He hid tools. He hid most of all a letter and a map. I found the cellar in October of 1924. I did not open it. I could not bring myself to. It was not mine to open. It belongs to the one Jeremiah wrote for, the one who would come with dirt in her hands and grief in her heart and a grandfather's teaching in her ears. It belongs to you, Cordelia. Go to the northern corner of the field, the highest ground. There is a flat stone 6 feet by 4 laid level with the earth. It does not belong there. It is not one of the field stones. It is the door. I have left a small sum with Pastor Whitmore, enough to secure your first weeks. He is a good man. Trust him. I have also lodged a certified copy of Jeremiah's original deed and map with the Ashe County Courthouse. If the day ever comes when you must prove what belongs to you, that record is there. I am sorry, my girl. I was a coward. I loved you more than my own life, but I did not act like it while I could still stand. Everything I have done since your mother died, I have done in secret and shame in the small hours of the night. Take this land. Take what is buried there. Take back what our family gave away. Build something on top of it that the Vivians and the Gradys of this world cannot take from you. Look for God in the dirt your mother told you. She was right. He is there, your father Thaddeus. Cordelia's tears came all at once. Not slow, not polite. They came like a wall. She pressed the letter to her mouth so she wouldn't sob out loud. But the sobs came anyway, deep, from under her ribs. Because her father had loved her. Her father had loved her. Her father had loved her, and she had spent 11 years thinking he had chosen Vivian over her, and now this piece of paper was telling her that he had not. He had been fighting for her. Quietly. In the dark. In a mountain town no one in the family knew about. For 10 years. Pastor Whitmore said nothing. He passed her a clean white handkerchief. He waited. When she could speak again, her voice was small. Who is Grady? Pastor Whitmore's mouth tightened. Elias Grady, largest landowner in this county. His grandfather, William Grady, bought most of your family's land in 1867, during the Reconstruction, when Whitfields down here were starving. It was not, shall we say, a fair sale. And my father knew this. Your father found it out. He was a merchant child. He knew how to read a ledger. He came up here for 3 days, and he read every deed in the county office. He put the whole thing together. Why didn't he just take it back? The pastor looked at her, sadly, kindly. Because he was one man in a lowland town married to a woman with a lawyer's tongue, and he was afraid of her Cordelia. He was afraid of her. And I think it broke his heart every day that he was. Cordelia lowered her head. She let the letter rest on her lap. She let her father's words rest with her. She let them settle, the way seeds settle in cold October ground, waiting for the spring. She spent that first night in the church. Pastor Whitmore made up a cot in the fellowship hall. He brought her a bowl of chicken and dumplings his housekeeper had left in the icebox. He brought her a cup of hot milk with honey. He set a Bible on the pillow beside her, and he told her she could open it or not, but he'd feel better knowing it was there. Then he shut the door. And Cordelia lay in the dark, in a strange room, in a strange town, with her father's letter folded against her heart, and she did not feel alone. For the first time in 11 years, she did not feel alone. Morning came pale and cold. Pastor Whitmore gave her a wool scarf that had belonged to his wife dead these 15 years. He gave her directions to the field. Down the road past the old quarry. 2.5 miles. You'll see the track breaking off to the left. It's rutted. Watch your ankles. Cordelia thanked him. She hoisted her trunk. She started walking. The road climbed. The road narrowed. The road turned to mud. Her boots grew heavy. Her arms went numb. The wind sliced through her coat and found every seam. She kept walking, because Grandpa Ezra used to say walking was praying if you did it right. She passed the old quarry. She saw the track break off to the left. She turned, and then, ahead, below her, sloping down toward a sluggish stream. She saw it, Whitfield's waste. 4.5 acres of gorse and bracken and hard tussocky grass and stone. Stone everywhere. Stone the size of her fist. Stone the size of a bread loaf. Stone the size of a butcher's block. It was exactly what everyone had said it was. A field that would break a plow. A field that would break a heart. Cordelia set her trunk down. She stood at the edge of her inheritance, and she looked out over it. The wind blew her hair across her face. The mountains rose behind her, dark and old and silent. Far below the stream caught a slice of watery sun and threw it back at her. She looked north, toward the highest corner. She saw it right away. A slab of gray limestone, different from the local stone, flat, wide, lying level with the earth. Almost, not quite, something about the way it sat. Like a door someone had shut. Her father's voice came up in her chest. It is the door. Cordelia knelt in the wet grass. She took the finch out of her pocket, set it on the ground beside her. She unfolded the linen handkerchief and took out Grandpa Ezra's trowel. She held it a moment, the handle warm even in the cold air. Warm like a hand still holding her hand. She lifted her eyes to the gray sky. She whispered, All right, Papa. All right, Grandpa. All right, Lord. She whispered, Show me what I'm supposed to do. And the wind moved through the gorse, and somewhere down by the stream a crow called, once sharp and clear. And Cordelia Whitfield, 20 years old, with $7 in her glove, and 75 years of family secret waiting under a stone at her knees, bent forward. And she began very carefully to scrape away the earth. The moss came up in dark green scabs. She worked slowly, not because she was tired, because Grandpa Ezra had taught her that hurry was how you broke tools and missed truths. She worked the trowel's point along the edge of the slab, scraping decades of matted root and rotted leaf away from the stone's rim. The first thing she uncovered was a line, a straight, clean line, where the flat slab met a second stone beneath it. Cordelia's breath caught, because natural stones didn't lie against each other like that. Natural stones jumbled, natural stones tilted. This was a joint, cut, fitted, mason's work. She kept scraping. Half an hour, her knees soaked through, her fingers red and stiff. But the edges came clean, all 4 of them. And what she uncovered was not a boulder half buried in the hillside. It was a capstone, 6 feet by 4, dressed square, set into a stone frame that ran down into the ground beneath it, a chamber, under her feet. Cordelia sat back on her heels. She was breathing hard, not from work, from something else. She pressed her palm flat against the cold limestone and she said very quietly, Hello, Jeremiah. The wind came up the... Nothing answered, but she felt him anyway. The way you feel someone standing behind you in a room. Not a ghost, not a presence, just a certainty. Somebody was here first. Somebody made this. Somebody meant it for someone. Meant it for her. She wiped her hands on her skirt. She stood up. Her legs almost buckled. She hadn't eaten since the biscuit yesterday morning, and it was well past noon now. She needed food. She needed a shovel bigger than a hand trowel. She needed a lever. She needed a lantern, and she needed very badly. Not to open this cellar alone, in the fading afternoon light, with no one on earth knowing where she was. She turned. She hoisted her trunk. She started back down the track toward Fenwick. Delaney's bakery was warm. That was the first thing that hit her. Warm. Yeast in the air. The good smell of a bread oven that had been going since 4 in the morning. A round woman in a flour-dusted apron stood behind the counter, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her forearms strong as any man's. She looked up when the bell over the door rang, took one look at Cordelia, and her whole face went from busy to still, just that fast. Oh, sweet Lord. Sit down, honey. Right there. That chair. Sit. I'm sorry, I only came for bread. You came for more than that. Sit, Ellis, Ellis. A boy of about 12 came out of the back, flour on his nose. Run to the pastor. Tell him the Whitfield girl's here, and she looks like she hasn't eaten in a week. Go. Ellis went. Cordelia sat. The woman put a mug of coffee in front of her. Then a plate. A thick slice of white bread, butter, a piece of cheese, a wedge of apple pie. I can pay, Cordelia said. You will not. Ma'am, you will not. The woman set her hands on her hips. Your father sat in that same chair once, 10 years ago, come Halloween. He had coffee and a piece of my mother's apple pie, God rest my mother. And he told my daddy he had a daughter about my Ellis's age, and he hoped one day he could bring her up here to see the mountains. The room tilted a little. Cordelia gripped the edge of the table. "You're Mrs. Delaney." "Ruth Delaney. My husband was Silas Delaney. Died in the influenza in 1918. It's just me and Ellis in the oven now. Eat your bread, child." Cordelia ate. She had not known she was hungry until the first bite. Then she was ravenous. She tried to slow down. She could not. The bread was still warm from the morning oven, and it broke in her hands like something living. Mrs. Delaney watched her eat and did not say another word. When Cordelia set down the empty plate, her eyes were wet again. She had not meant them to be. They just were. "Thank you, ma'am." "You are more than welcome, honey. Now, what do you need?" Cordelia thought. She thought about lying. She thought about the flat stone in the cellar underneath and the 75 years of family secrets and the fact that her father had told exactly one person in Fenwick about it. Then she looked at Ruth Delaney's flour-dusted face, and she thought about how the woman had said, "Sit the way you say it" to a child. And she thought about how her mother had told her a lifetime ago to look for God in the hands of people who work. "I need a lantern," Cordelia said. "A big one, with oil. And I need to know where to find a blacksmith. And I need to know where a girl can sleep tonight who doesn't want to trouble the pastor twice in a row." Mrs. Delaney nodded. "Lantern I've got, back room. Ellis will bring it down. Blacksmith is August Kohler down at the end of Main Street. Big German, doesn't say much, doesn't like foolishness. But he's fair as a scale, and as for sleeping, you'll sleep upstairs. I have a room, my daughter's old room. She married a man in Asheville and moved away last spring, and the bed sits there empty, and it has been breaking my heart to see it empty, and you are going to sleep in it tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night until you have your own roof over your head. Do you understand me? I can pay for a room." "Cordelia Whitfield." Cordelia stopped. "I'm not letting you pay me for the bed my daughter left behind. Do not insult me." Cordelia lowered her head. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. You're welcome. Now, what are you going up to that field for at 4 in the afternoon in October? What are you needing a lantern for?" Cordelia looked up. She met the woman's eyes, and she said the only true thing she could think of. "My father left something buried there, and I have to find out what it is." Mrs. Delaney studied her a long moment. Then she nodded, once. "Ellis," she called, "fetch the big tin lantern from the back shelf, and a fresh bottle of kerosene, and put them in a sack for Miss Whitfield." She turned back to Cordelia. "You go see August Kohler now. You tell him Ruth Delaney sent you, and you tell him you need whatever he can spare that will pry a stone." The forge was at the far end of Main Street. The doors were open. Heat rolled out into the cold October air like a living thing. Inside, a big man in a leather apron was hammering something small and orange on an anvil. One strike, two strikes, three strikes, a hiss of steam as he dipped it into a quenching barrel. He looked up. Blue eyes, face like a slab of oak. Beard singed white at the tips. "Ja, and Kohlerman Jai. Mrs. Delaney sent me. I need to pry a stone." He set his hammer down, wiped his hands on a rag. He came around the anvil to get a better look at her. He was easily 6.5 feet tall. His shoulders filled the doorway between forge and shop. "How big a stone?" 6 feet by 4, flat, set into a frame. His eyebrows went up. "That is not a stone. That is a door." Cordelia said nothing, because there was nothing to say. August Kohler looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You are Whitfield?" "Yes, sir." "Ja." He nodded, slow, like a man confirming something to himself. "The pastor said one day someone would come. He told me one thing, miss. He told me to keep an eye out. And if a young Whitfield ever walked into my forge, I was to help her, whatever she asked." Cordelia had to look away. At the fire. At the tools racked along the wall, anywhere. Because her father had reached his hand through 10 years and touched 3 people in this town on her behalf. A pastor, a baker, and a blacksmith with singed white in his beard. He had known, somehow, that she would need all 3 of them. August Kohler walked to a rack along the back wall and lifted down a heavy iron pry bar, nearly 5 feet long, a wicked hook on one end, a flat wedge on the other. He came back and set it in her hands. She almost dropped it. It weighed as much as a filled water bucket. "You will not lift a 6x4 slab with your arms, miss. You will use this bar and a fulcrum stone, small stone, rounded. You put the flat end under the slab. You put the small stone under the bar. You push down on this end." He tapped the hook. "The slab will rise. Not far. Enough." "I understand." "You do not." She looked up. "You do not," he said again, "because you are 20 years old and I am 53, and I am telling you. That stone has been closed for a long time, a long time. Whatever's under it will be dry. Whatever's under it will be old, and the air will be bad the first time you open it. You wait 10 minutes before you go down. You breathe fresh air. You let the bad air out, or you will pass out on the steps and no one will find you until spring." Cordelia nodded slowly and "Thank you." J and Miss. He touched 2 fingers to his temple. One more thing. Do not go alone tonight. Come back tomorrow morning, full light. I will send my boy with you, my apprentice. I don't want to trouble anyone. You will trouble me more if you fall down a hole and die. And I have to look Ruth Delaney in the face on Sunday. Cordelia almost laughed. It surprised her. All right, she said. All right, Mr. Kohler. Tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Sunrise. My boy will meet you at the bakery. His name is Everett Rhodes. He is my apprentice and he drives the delivery cart. He is a good boy. Quiet, strong. He will help you. The name touched something in her ear. She did not know why. Everett Rhodes. She thanked him. She lifted the pry bar with both hands. She hoisted it against her shoulder like a soldier's rifle. And she walked out of the forge and back up Main Street to the bakery, the iron cold against her collarbone. Behind her in the doorway, August Kohler watched her go. He did not smile, but something in his big square face softened. He said quietly in German, a word that meant finally. Cordelia slept that night in a stranger's daughter's bed. The quilt was thick, blue and white, wedding ring pattern. She lay on her back with her hands folded on top of the quilt like a corpse, and she stared at the ceiling and she did not sleep for a long time. She thought about her father. She thought about the 3 days he had spent in this town in October of 1924. 6 months after he had married Vivian. 2 weeks after Vivian had thrown out Adelaide's lavender bushes from the south wall and planted rows of Sharon instead. Cordelia had watched Vivian do it. She had been 10 years old. She had stood at the parlor window and she had watched her stepmother rip up her mother's lavender by the roots and pile it in a wheelbarrow to burn. She had not understood then why her father had left the house early the next morning without saying where he was going. She understood now. Hun had gotten on a train. He had come up here, he had walked into a bakery and eaten apple pie and told a woman he wished he could bring his daughter to see the mountains. He had walked into a forge and looked at a blacksmith he did not know and asked him to remember. He had walked into a church and given a pastor an envelope and told him to keep it for 10 years. He had come home. He had gone back to Vivian. He had lived with her and endured her and let himself be smaller in his own house than he had ever been. For 11 years, because he had a plan, because he had already started building it, because he loved her more than he could show. Cordelia turned her face into the pillow, and she wept without sound for a long time. And then she slept. Everett Rhodes was waiting on the bakery steps at first light. He was maybe 22, tall and thin, not thin like sickly, thin like the boys who work outdoors every day and never carry any spare weight. He had a mop of dark brown hair he kept pushing out of his eyes and a face that seemed to blush easily at the collar. He stood up when she came out. He took his hat off. Miss Whitfield, ma'am. Please, Cordelia. He turned red at that, actually red. Miss Cordelia. She almost laughed. She stopped herself. Mr. Rhodes. Everett, please, ma'am, Everett. They stood there, awkward. 2 young people who had never met each other and now had to spend the morning breaking open a family crypt. Cordelia handed him the pry bar. He hoisted it easily onto one shoulder. He took the sack with the lantern in his other hand. Mr. Kohler said you had a horse and cart, she said as they started up Main Street. Yes, ma'am. Bess, she's at the forge. But Mr. Kohler said we should walk. He said if you're going to work land, you should feel the land under your feet the first time you cross it. Cordelia glanced at him. He was looking straight ahead. He said that, yes, ma'am. He talks more than he looks like he talks. Only when it matters, ma'am. They walked. The road climbed. The road narrowed. Cordelia noticed. Everett Rhodes walked at exactly her pace. Not faster. He did not stride ahead like a man showing off. He did not lag behind like a man being polite. He walked next to her. Steady. She noticed that too. At the field, he set down the tools. He turned in a slow circle. He looked out over the 4.5 acres of stone and gorse and bracken and the sluggish stream cutting through the low ground. His mouth tightened, not in disgust, not in pity, in understanding. There's good bones here, he said quietly. Cordelia turned. What did you say? I said there's good bones. It's sour ground, it's stony. But look at the slope. Look how the water runs. You cut 2 ditches, one there, one there. You lime the whole thing over 3 seasons. You could feed a family off this. She stared at him. You're a farmer. My daddy was, before he died. I helped him work 40 acres over in Watauga County till I was 17. He passed in 29. Then it was just my mom and me. She couldn't work the land. We had to sell it. That's when I came up here to apprentice with Mr. Kohler, so I could send money home. I'm sorry. Thank you, ma'am. Cordelia looked at him, really looked, at his hands, long-fingered, farmer's hands still under the blacksmith's calluses, at his mouth, set, serious, at his eyes, which were the color of good creekstone and would not meet hers. Grandpa Ezra had said once, you can trust a man who won't look at you when you're being kind to him. You can't ever trust a man who does. She turned toward the north corner of the field. "The slab's up there," she said. "Come on." They cleared the last of the moss together. Cordelia used the trowel. Everett used the flat wedge end of the pry bar to scrape the mortar-hard dirt from the edges. Neither of them talked. There was no need. At mid-morning, Everett stepped back, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, looked at what they had uncovered. "That's not a boulder, Miss Cordelia." "I know. That's a capstone." "I know." He looked at her. "Are you ready?" She thought about it. About Vivian's face in the lawyer's office. About the ghost of Lavender in the parlor. About her father's letter. About Jeremiah Whitfield, dead and buried for 100 years, who had built this thing with his own hands in the shadow of a war he must have known was coming. "Yes, she said. Everett drove the flat end of the pry bar into the seam. He found a fist-sized round river stone for a fulcrum. He set it. He weighted the bar. He looked at Cordelia. "On three, both of us." "All right." 1. Cordelia's hand tightened on the bar. 2. She was aware distantly that she was smiling. 3. They pushed. The capstone did not move. They reset. They tried again. The bar bit deeper into the seam. On the third push, there came a grinding, protesting shriek of stone on stone, and the slab shifted. Half an inch. Then 2. Then, with a final wrench that sent both of them staggering, it slid sideways. A rectangle of blackness opened in the ground at Cordelia's feet, and out of it rose a breath of air. Cold, impossibly dry, smelling of dust and old iron and something else. Something she could not name. Something like the inside of an old family Bible. Everett stepped back. He remembered Mr. Kohler's warning. "We wait, Miss Cordelia. We wait." They sat down in the wet grass at the edge of the hole. Cordelia hugged her knees. Everett rolled a piece of straw between his fingers and did not look at her. 10 minutes. The wind moved over the field. Somewhere down by the stream, that same crow called again, once, sharp. Cordelia thought of her mother. Look for him in the dirt, in the trees, in the hands of people who work. She looked at Everett Rhodes's hands, long-fingered, calloused, steady. She looked away. Because she was 20 years old and standing on top of a 75-year-old secret with a boy she had met an hour ago, and there was absolutely no time for that. Not yet. She stood up. "All right," she said. "That's 10 minutes." Everett stood up too. He handed her the lantern. She struck the match. The flame caught, warm and small and yellow. She held it up. She looked down into the black rectangle on the ground. 10 stone steps. Perfect, even. Cut and set by a mason who had known what he was doing. Going down, into the dark. Everett said quietly, "You want me to go first, ma'am?" "No." She said it before she had thought about it. Then she said softer, "No, thank you, Everett. But this isn't your grandfather, it's mine." He nodded. He understood. He stepped back a pace and gave her the room she needed. Cordelia Whitfield lifted the lantern. She lifted her chin. She whispered, "All right, Papa, I'm coming down." And she took her first step into the dark. The stairs were dry. She had expected damp. She had expected the walls to weep, but they did not. They were tight-fitted stone laid with such careful precision that 75 years of North Carolina rain and snow had never found a way in. Jeremiah Whitfield had known what he was doing. Jeremiah Whitfield had built for time. 10 steps down. She counted them. The lantern showed her a small chamber, 10 feet by 10, ceiling low enough that she had to duck her head an inch. Walls of the same tight limestone, a floor of flagstones so evenly laid that even after 75 years there was hardly a gap between them. And in the center of the room, one thing, an oak chest, iron-bound, not locked. Cordelia set the lantern down on top of it. The flame steadied. She looked at the chest a long moment. Her breath was loud in the small, dry room. She thought 100 years of my family are in this box. She thought, no one has opened this since 1859. She thought, please God, let it be enough. She reached down, she lifted the lid. It was heavier than it looked. The hinges creaked, then gave, and the lantern light spilled down into the box, and Cordelia saw what her great-great-grandfather Jeremiah had left her. Canvas bags, a dozen of them, stacked neat, heavy with the unmistakable clink of coins. Beneath the bags, a wooden tray. Lifted out, it revealed a set of old but beautifully maintained hand tools, a plow, a billhook, a scythe, a spade, each one greased against rust, each one wrapped in oiled cloth, each one waiting. And on top of the canvas bags in a small sealed tin box, a letter. Cordelia lifted the tin box out. Her hands shook. She sat down cross-legged on the flagstone floor, the lantern beside her, the tin box on her lap. She thumbed the seal open. Inside was a folded sheet of thick yellowed paper, and beneath the sheet, folded smaller, another paper, the size of a large handkerchief, softer, older still. She unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was strong, old-fashioned, slanted forward like a man leaning into a wind. To whomever finds this place, my name is Jeremiah Whitfield. This land is mine, and I have built this cellar with my own two hands to keep safe what my family will need in the troubled years I feel coming. Herein, you will find my life savings, 180 gold sovereigns, and the best of my tools. I had hoped to use them to drain this stubborn ground and build a home for my son and his sons after him. But the world has other plans, and my heart tells me I will not live to see the field made good. If you are a Whitfield, know that this is your birthright. If you are a stranger, I ask only that you use this gift not for idle folly, but to bring life back to this land. Do not let the stone defeat you. The stone is the bone of the house you will build. The soil is sour, but it can be sweetened. Work it well, and it will provide. Under this letter, you will find a map. It is the true bounds of the Whitfield holding as recorded in the deeds of 1841. 15 acres, not 4.5. If you find this cellar and you are of my blood, then somewhere between my hand and yours, someone has taken what was ours. Find them. Take it back. Not for pride, for the children who come after you. God grant you peace in this place. Jeremiah Whitfield, May the 1st, 1859. Cordelia held the letter. She was crying without knowing it. Her tears were falling on the stone floor. She unfolded the second paper. The map, beautifully drawn. A surveyor's hand. The Whitfield parcel outlined in careful black ink. The stream marked. The road marked. The northern corner where she was sitting right now marked with a small, careful X. And the boundary of the parcel was almost 3 times what her deed said. 11 acres of it now lay outside her line. Bordered on the north and west by a parcel labeled in the surveyor's neat hand GRADY, Cordelia stared at the map. Below in the still dry chamber, the lantern flame did not flicker. Above at the top of the steps, Everett Rhodes waited, and Cordelia Whitfield, on her knees in a room that had been sealed for 75 years, understood all at once and completely that her father had not left her a field. He had left her a fight, and he had left her exactly the tools she would need to win it. She folded the letter. She folded the map. She placed them back in the tin box. She placed the tin box in her coat pocket next to the finch and the deed. She stood up. She took one long look around the little chamber, at the neat stack of coin bags, at the waiting tools, at the flagstones her great-great-grandfather had laid by lantern light in a country about to tear itself apart. She whispered, "Thank you, Jeremiah." She lifted the lantern, and she climbed the 10 stone steps back up into the wind and the light of the world above. Everett Rhodes was standing where she had left him. He had not moved. When she came up the last step, he looked at her face. He did not ask what she had found. He did not ask if she was all right. He just took the lantern from her hand and set it carefully on the ground. Then he said quietly, "Whatever it is, Miss Cordelia, I won't tell a soul." And Cordelia Whitfield, standing at the edge of an open grave that had turned out to be a cradle, felt the wind lift her hair off her face, and she believed him. She looked out over the 4.5 acres that were on paper hers, and the 11 acres that on paper were not. The mountains behind her were very old and very quiet, and she said half to Everett Rhodes, half to the wind, half to the ghost of a man who had died 100 years ago, having built a room in the earth for a great-great-granddaughter he would never meet. All right, then we get to work. They closed the cellar before they went back down the mountain. Everett fitted the capstone into its frame. Cordelia banked wet turf around the edges. From 10 feet away in the flat gray afternoon light, you could not have told there was a door there at all. They walked back to Fenwick in silence. Halfway down the track, she stopped. Everett stopped a pace later when he realized. "Miss Cordelia, Everett, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know a man named Elias Grady?" She watched his face. It did not change fast. It changed the way a lake changes when a cloud passes over it. The color underneath went dark. He set the lantern down. He set the pry bar down. He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Cordelia." "Yes. Elias Grady is my grandfather." The wind came up the track. Cordelia's mouth went dry. She said carefully, "Your grandfather?" "Yes, ma'am." "Elias Grady, who owns the parcels north and west of the field I just inherited?" "Yes, ma'am." "The largest landowner in Ashe County?" "Yes, ma'am." Cordelia's hand went to her pocket, closed around the tin box. She did not know Everett Rhodes. She had known him for 6 hours. 6 hours ago, he had been a boy with a mop of dark brown hair on the bakery steps, and now he was blood kin to the man whose name was written on the west side of her great-great-grandfather's map. Grandpa Ezra's voice came up in her chest. Steady, low. "Never move on a stone, Cordy, until you know which way it wants to fall." She said quietly, "Tell me." Everett looked out over the mountains. His mouth moved before the words came. "My daddy was his son, his only son. My daddy married my mama in 1911. She was a Rhodes, a farmer's daughter, poor. My grandfather, Elias. He didn't. He didn't approve. Told my daddy if he married her, he'd cut him off. Every penny, every acre, every promise. And your daddy married her." "Yes, ma'am." "And your grandfather cut him off?" "Yes, ma'am. My daddy took my mama's name. Roads. He worked 40 rented acres in Watauga County till he died in 29. My mama and I never saw my grandfather once in my whole life. Not once. My grandfather has never spoken my name. Cordelia was very still. Do you know him at all? I know what folks say. What do folks say? Everett looked at her. Straight on this time. Not shy, not blushing, something else. They say if he wants a thing, he gets it. They say he has a lawyer in Boone and a judge in Jefferson who will do whatever he asks. They say his father before him had a brother who used to check the county deed records for the family hunting down old widows and orphans with parcels next to theirs. They say some of what the Gradys own now was not honestly bought. They say Elias himself never did any of that. But he never gave any of it back either, Everett paused. They say he keeps a box. A box. In his study, iron, locked, he does not let a living soul near it. My mama used to say it was where he kept the old papers. The papers from before I was born. The papers he does not want the light of day on. Cordelia said nothing. She was thinking. She was thinking very fast. She lifted her chin. She said, Everett. Yes, ma'am. Look at me. He looked at her. If I am about to tell you what my father left me under that stone, am I making a mistake? He did not answer right away. He did not swear on his mother. He did not put his hand on his heart. He did not do any of the theatrical things a lesser man would have done. He said very quietly, Miss Cordelia, I do not owe my grandfather one breath of my life. I have been alive 22 years, and he has never once looked at my face. My daddy died in a rented field because my grandfather would not lift a finger to save him. My mama has a cough this winter that she cannot shake, and I send home every dime I make for Mr. Kohler to buy her medicine. If you tell me a thing and my grandfather is on one side of it and you are on the other, I know which side I'm standing on. Cordelia looked at him. She looked for a very long time. Then she reached into her pocket and she took out the tin box. They sat down on a fallen log beside the track. She showed Everett the letter first. She let him read it in his own time. He read it twice. His mouth moved with the words the second time. When he was done, he pressed the letter flat against his thigh with the flat of his hand as if to hold it still. Then she showed him the map. She watched him when he saw the GRADY on the west boundary. He did not blink. He had known before he looked. Miss Cordelia. Yes. That parcel, the 11 acres, I know it. I've driven the delivery cart past it 100 times. It runs from your northern corner up along the creek to a place my grandfather calls the Wagon Meadow. He runs cattle on it. There is an old stone foundation on the far side of it. He calls it the Old Wall. It is not one of his walls. It is older than his walls. Cordelia's heart moved. My great-great-grandfather's foundation. I think so, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They sat with that. The wind came up the track. Cordelia folded the map. She folded the letter. She put them back in the tin box. She closed the tin box. She held it in both hands in her lap. She said, I do not want to fight him tomorrow. No, ma'am. I have to build first. I have to prove I can hold what I already have on paper before I can ask anyone to give me back what I don't. My father put 10 years into this. I can give it a year. Everett nodded. He said, yes, ma'am, that is wise. Cordelia looked at him. I did not ask you to say it was wise. He almost smiled. He almost. No, ma'am. She stood up. Come on, she said. It's getting dark. They walked the rest of the way down the mountain side by side. By the time they came into Fenwick, Everett's shoulders had loosened. The pry bar rode easier. And Cordelia Whitfield, for the second time in 20 years, had told a person the truth about her family. The first had been her mother. Now this. That night she wrote a list. She sat at Mrs. Delaney's kitchen table after supper with a stub of pencil and a piece of bakery paper, and she wrote out what needed to happen and in what order. 1. Secure the cellar. Iron grate. Lock. August Kohler. 2. Move 6 sovereigns to a bank. Deposit under her own name. The rest stay hidden. 3. Buy a tent blankets, a cast iron pot, an axe, a proper shovel. Move on to the field. Sleep on her own dirt. 4. Hire a mason. Start the cottage. 5. Pay next year's property tax immediately, 6 months early. Do not give Vivian a legal seam to reach through. 6. Say nothing to anyone about the map, about Grady, about the 11 acres. 7. Not yet. She underlined not yet twice. Then she folded the paper. She tucked it inside the little book of pressed flowers her mother had made, between the page with the pressed violet and the page with the pressed goldenrod. She closed the book. She went to bed. The next morning, she went to see the pastor. She told him what she had found under the stone, all of it, the coins, the letter, the map, the Grady name on the west boundary. Pastor Whitmore listened without moving. When she was finished, he took off his glasses and pressed his knuckles into his eyes and did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he said, Your father knew all of this. I guessed. Guess no more. Your father sat in this very chair in October of 1924, and he told me every word of what you just told me. He told me he had walked the deed records and put it together. He told me he did not have the strength to fight Elias Grady in his lifetime. But he had a daughter, and one day she would. Cordelia was quiet. He also, said the pastor, made 2 arrangements with me. May I tell you them now? Yes. The first, he gave me a small sum, $50, to be held against your first weeks in this town. If you needed a room, a meal, a doctor, the money is downstairs in the church safe. It is untouched. It is yours. Cordelia's eyes stung. The second, he rode down to Jefferson to the courthouse, and he lodged a certified copy of Jeremiah Whitfield's original 1841 deed in the county registrar's office, officially recorded, officially witnessed, officially notarized, not a photostat, not a rumor, a certified copy of the true bounds of the Whitfield holding as they stood before Elias Grady's grandfather ever saw them. It has been sitting in the Ashe County records under your father's name for 10 years. Cordelia looked at Pastor Whitmore. She could not speak. He nodded very slowly. Yes, child, your father did not send you into a fight empty-handed. He put a bullet in your gun before he even taught you to hold it. She did the practical work next. She went back to the forge. She commissioned an iron grate for the cellar mouth, 4 feet by 6, heavy bars, a locking hasp. She paid August Kohler 2 sovereigns and did not say what they had come from, and he did not ask. He looked at the coins in his palm a long moment. Old gold. Yes, very old. Yes. He set the coins into a leather pouch and put the pouch inside his shirt. J.E., he said, 3 days for the grate. Everett will come with me to help set it. Anything else, miss, she thought. Yes. Yeah, I need a canvas tent, sturdy. Room for a bedroll and a small cook stove. I have one, my brother's. He does not need it anymore. I will bring it up with the grate. And I would like to pay you for it. You will not. Mr. Kohler. You will not, Miss Whitfield. He set the leather pouch under his shirt and folded his enormous arms across his chest. The grate you paid me for. The tent is because your father sat in my forge in 1924 and told me a story about a little girl who liked to read to her grandfather in the evenings, and I have carried that story in my head for 10 years, and I am glad to lay it down. Cordelia did not trust herself to speak. She nodded. August Kohler nodded back. That was the end of it. At the general store, she bought blankets, a cast iron pot, an axe with a hickory handle, a proper long-handled spade, a small kerosene camp stove, a tin lamp, 2 boxes of matches, coffee, salt, flour, beans, bacon, a jar of Mrs. Delaney's blackberry preserves that Mrs. Delaney insisted on adding at the last minute, no charge or so help her. The storekeeper was a lean man with the round spectacles and a careful face. He totaled her bill twice. When she paid him with a $5 bill from a proper billfold, he looked at her over the top of his spectacles. You settling somewhere, miss? Yes, sir. Whereabouts? Whitfield's waste. I own it. His pencil paused. He looked at her. You own the waste? Yes, sir. By yourself? Yes, sir. The storekeeper was quiet a moment. Then he said slowly, my grandfather knew a Whitfield, once. Yes, sir. That would be my great-grandfather. I see. He did not say anything else. He rang up her purchases. He gave her back her change to the penny. And when she left, he watched her go with something in his expression she could not quite read. She would learn later that his grandfather had been the surveyor, the one who had drawn the map, the one who had put the careful ink boundary around 15 acres in 1841. The mountains kept their secrets, but they also kept their witnesses. She moved on to the land that night. She pitched the tent in the shelter of the north corner 10 paces from the covered cellar mouth. She built a small fire ring of the field's own stones. She cooked bacon and beans over the camp stove. She ate sitting on a flat piece of sandstone she'd already earmarked for a lintel someday, and she watched the sun go down behind the mountains, and the mountains turned dark blue, then black, and the stars came out. She had never seen so many stars. Not once in her life. Down in the lowlands, the town lights had washed half of them out. Up here, there was nothing to compete with. The sky was a bowl of white fire. Cordelia sat on the flat stone with her plate on her knees, and she looked up, and she said very quietly, Mama. She had not called her mother that in 11 years. She had trained herself not to. Vivian did not like it. Tonight she said it out loud. Mama, I found him in the dirt, just like you said. The wind moved through the gorse. Somewhere below her, a nightbird called. Cordelia's throat ached. She kept looking up. I'm going to be all right, Mama. Papa left me enough. Papa left me more than enough. I don't know how yet. I'm going to be all right. She lowered her eyes. She looked out over the 4.5 acres of stone and thorn and hard tussocky grass, and the sluggish stream cutting through the low ground. Everett Rhodes had said, there's good bones here. Everett Rhodes had been right. Cordelia stood up. She rinsed her plate in a bucket. She banked the fire. She crawled into her tent. She lay down in her bedroll with Grandpa Ezra's trowel next to her right hand and her mother's Finch next to her left, and the tin box with Jeremiah's letter under her folded coat as a pillow. Just before she slept, she thought, tomorrow. Tomorrow the mason. Tomorrow the walls start to rise. Tomorrow I begin. Silas Marsh lived in a whitewashed cottage at the end of Church Street. He was 71 years old. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. His arms were thin and wiry, and his hands were the color of the granite dust that had settled into every line of his face over 50 years of masonry. He answered the door with a piece of buttered bread in one hand. He looked Cordelia up and down. He said no. He tried to close the door. Cordelia put her boot in it. Mr. Marsh, I do not do work for children. I'm not a child. I do not do work for young women alone in fields either. Move your boot. My grandfather was Ezra Bellamy. Silas Marsh stopped pushing the door. Very slowly, he pulled it back open. He looked at her. He looked at her for a very long time. He said quietly, say that name again. Ezra Bellamy, from over Watauga County, from the Ashford tenant farm. Yes, sir. Silas Marsh set his piece of bread down on a small table by the door. He wiped his hands on his trousers. He looked at Cordelia the way a man looks at a ghost he has been half expecting. Come inside, Miss Whitfield, he said. It is too cold to talk on a doorstep. His parlor was small, a wood stove, 2 chairs, a bookshelf with a Bible, a hymnal, and 3 volumes of a bound edition of the works of James Fenimore Cooper. He set a kettle on the stove. He sat down. He said, in the winter of 1893, my wife was expecting our first child and I was between jobs, and there was no money in the house for food and there was no wood cut in the shed. Your grandfather did not know me. I did not know him. He was working a field 2 farms over from where I was renting a room. He heard from somebody or other that a young mason and his young wife were about to starve in a January cold snap. He walked 11 miles in the snow to my door. He was carrying a side of bacon and a bag of dried beans and a sack of potatoes on his shoulder. He was a small man, your grandfather. He was not tall, but he had walked 11 miles in the snow with all that on his back. He handed it to me at the door. He did not come inside. He said, I heard you needed this, and he turned around and he walked 11 miles home. Silas Marsh looked at the stove. I owe your grandfather a life, Miss Whitfield. My wife did not starve. Our first child was born in April. His name was Ezra. Cordelia's eyes were wet. She said nothing. Silas Marsh looked at her. So, what do you need? A cottage? Small, 1 room and a loft, stone, on my field. You have the stone. The field is nothing but stone. You have the money. Enough for lime, for lentils, for roofing timber, for a mason. Yes, sir. You have the will. Yes, sir. Silas Marsh nodded. You do not want me to build it for you, do you? No, sir. You want me to teach you to build it. Yes, sir, with you, every wall. He looked at her again, the way he would have assessed a seam of stone before he put a chisel to it. Then he said, Monday morning, sunrise, bring gloves. Do not bring foolishness. I do not suffer fools. Cordelia stood up. She held out her hand. The old mason looked at her hand. Then he stood up too slowly and he took it. His grip was dry and hard. He said, Welcome to the mountains, Miss Whitfield. Monday morning came cold and clean. The sky was the color of pewter. The wind had died in the night. The grass on Whitfield's waist was silver with frost. Cordelia was up before the sun. She lit the camp stove. She boiled coffee in a tin pot. She wrapped both hands around the mug, and she stood at the tent flap and she watched the light come up over the mountains. Because today the wall started. Because today she stopped being a girl with a deed and started being a woman with a house. She heard the wagon before she saw it. Slow crunch of iron wheels on frozen mud. A cough. A snort of horse breath. Then Silas Marsh came around the bend of the track, small and wiry, sitting up on the seat of a bakery cart he had borrowed from Ruth Delaney with Everett Rhodes walking alongside leading Bess by the bridle. They pulled up at the edge of the field. Silas climbed down. He looked at her tent. He looked at her fire ring. He looked at her stacks of stone. Because in the 3 days between Friday and Monday, Cordelia had not been idle. She had been sorting. Every waking hour. Slab stone in one pile. Blocky stone in another. Round river stone in a third. Just like Grandpa Ezra had taught her. Silas Marsh looked at the piles. He nodded once. He said, You sorted proper. Yes, sir. Who taught you? Ezra Bellamy, my grandfather. I know, Silas said. I was asking to see if you would say his name out loud in the cold. You did. Good. He walked to the piles. He picked up a piece of blocky sandstone, tested its weight, turned it over, grunted, set it down. Then he turned to Everett. Boy. Yes, sir. Unload the mortar box, the trowels, the plumb bob, the string. Yes, sir. Silas turned back to Cordelia. He said, You are going to hate me by lunch. Yes, sir. You are going to hate me more by supper. Yes, sir. And by Wednesday, you are going to want to hit me with my own hammer. Yes, sir, Silas Marsh smiled. just a little, just at the corner of his mouth. Good. That means I'm teaching you correctly. Now go get your gloves. The first course of stone was the hardest, not because it was heavy, because it was slow. Silas made her lay each stone twice. The first time she laid it, he would look at it and shake his head and say, "No, girl, that stone has a face. You have shown me the back. Turn it." She would turn it. He would shake his head again. "Better, but its long grain is running the wrong way. You have laid it like a book on end. Lay it like a book on its side." She would lay it like a book on its side. I would still not be satisfied. "It rocks. Touch it. Feel it. Yes. That corner's high. Chip that corner." "No, not with the hammer. With the chisel. The hammer is for driving. The chisel is for shaping. God gave you two tools. He gave you two hands. Use them." By 10 in the morning, her forearms were shaking. By noon, her lower back had knots the size of walnuts. By 1 o'clock, she had laid 17 stones, which was, Silas Marsh said generously, about half of what a decent mason lays in a morning. She could have wept. She did not. Because Everett Rhodes was mixing mortar 3 feet away, and if she wept, she would have to explain it, and she did not want to explain it, and so she did not weep. Instead, at 1:15, when Silas turned his back to spit and rub his nose, Cordelia leaned her forehead against a piece of gray sandstone, and she whispered so quietly no one could hear Grandpa, "Are you watching this?" The wind moved through the gorse. She could almost hear him answer, "Yes, Cordy, and it is beautiful." She straightened up. She reached for the next stone. Ruth Delaney brought dinner up the mountain at noon. She rode in the front of a delivery wagon driven by her son Ellis. Ellis was 12 and skinny as a rake and freckled from ear to ear. He drove with the reins in one hand and a slice of buttered bread in the other. He waved at Cordelia with the bread. Ruth climbed down carrying a basket the size of a small trunk, fried chicken, a pan of cornbread, a jar of green beans, a quart of buttermilk, a pot of collards, 2 apple hand pies. She spread it on a piece of oilcloth on the stone Cordelia had chosen for the doorstep. Silas Marsh looked at the food. He looked at Ruth. He said, "Woman, this is too much." "Silas, sit down and hush." "Ruth, sit down, Silas Marsh, and hush." He sat down. He hushed. Cordelia looked at Everett. Everett looked at Cordelia. They both nearly laughed. They both did not. They ate on the ground. Cordelia had not tasted fried chicken since before her father died. Vivian did not permit fried chicken in the house. Vivian said fried chicken was for people who did not know better. Cordelia bit into a drumstick. She closed her eyes. She thought Vivian did not know better. About anything. Ruth Delaney watched her eat. Ruth Delaney did not say a word. Ruth Delaney just very quietly filled Cordelia's plate a second time. By Friday night, the foundation course was complete. By the following Wednesday, the first 3 courses of the north wall were up. By the end of the second week, the north and east walls stood 4 feet high, and Silas Marsh had for the first time said without prompting, "Girl, you are laying stone." Cordelia had not answered, because she was crying, and she had not wanted him to see. She had turned her back and pretended to fetch water, and when she came back, her eyes were clear. Silas had said nothing. Silas had known. The third week of November, the first snow came. Cordelia woke to it. She unzipped her tent flap, and there it was, an inch of white on the mountain, on her stacks of stone, on the low, sluggish stream. She stood up in her nightgown and her coat and her boots, and she walked out into the field, and she turned in a slow circle, and she breathed. Her breath came out white. The mountains all around her wore snow like old women wear shawls. She thought, "I live here now." She thought, "I am the person who lives here now." She thought, "This is my snow." And she smiled. She was not sure she had ever smiled at snow before. The cottage went up through the winter. Silas Marsh came 3 days a week, sometimes 4, sometimes when the weather was cruel, only 1. But he came every week. He never took $1 for his time. She tried. Twice. The first time he looked at the coin in her palm and said, "Girl, you do not pay a man for a debt he owes." The second time he did not look at the coin at all. He just walked away. She stopped trying. She started paying him in other ways. She learned that his knees were bad in cold weather, so she began keeping a folded blanket in the tent for him to kneel on. She learned that he took his coffee with 3 lumps of sugar even though the doctor had told him not to, so she began quietly putting 3 lumps in his mug and saying nothing. She learned that his wife had been dead 15 years, but he still liked to talk about her, so she asked him about her whenever the moment was right. Her name had been Miriam. She had made the best sweet potato pie in Ashe County. Silas kept a lock of her hair in a small silver locket he wore under his shirt. He showed it to Cordelia once in February when they were sitting inside the half-built cottage, waiting out a sudden hailstorm. He opened the locket. The hair was dark brown, long. It had been coiled inside the locket for 15 years, and it still shone. Silas Marsh looked at the hair. He said, "I have loved that woman for 52 years, Miss Whitfield. I do not know how a man is supposed to stop." Cordelia touched his shoulder just once, just quickly. Silas closed the locket. The hail rattled the temporary tarp roof. Neither of them said anything else. Everett Rhodes came almost every day. He would drive up in the delivery cart. Bess plodding steady, he would bring lime, roofing timber, panes of glass wrapped in straw, a load of split firewood, a jar of soup from his mother. He would stay an hour, sometimes two. He would help wherever help was needed. He carried stone. He mixed mortar. He held the plumb line while Cordelia read the level. He never once put himself forward. He never once tried to teach her something she had not asked to be taught. He noticed everything. He said very little. Cordelia noticed him noticing. She did not know what to do with it. She was 20 years old. She was building a house. She was hiding a treasure. She was preparing in the back of her mind for a fight with the richest man in the county. She did not have room for a boy with creekstone eyes who blushed when she called him by his first name. So she did not call him by his first name. She called him Mr. Rhodes. She called him Mr. Rhodes for 2 months. Until one afternoon in early February when he slipped on an icy stone carrying a load of timber and cut his palm open on a nail, and Cordelia caught his arm and dragged him inside the half-finished cottage and made him sit down on a crate while she washed the cut with hot water and wrapped it with a strip torn from her own petticoat. He did not look at her while she did it. She did not look at him either. But her fingers were on his hand, and his hand was steady. And when she tied the knot on the bandage, she said without meaning to, "Everett." He looked at her. His creekstone eyes. She said, "Does it hurt?" He said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Liar." He almost smiled. He almost. She said, "Say my name." His mouth open, closed, open again. He said so quietly she almost missed it. "Cordelia." She said, "Good." She stood up. She walked away. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She did not turn around. Because if she turned around, she would not know what to do next. And Cordelia Whitfield always knew what to do next. Ruth Delaney figured it out first. Of course she did. One Saturday afternoon in late February, Ruth showed up at the field with her basket. She unpacked lunch. She sat down on the doorstep stone. She waited until Silas Marsh had gone to fetch a load of mortar sand. She waited until Everett Rhodes had walked down to the stream to water Bess. Then she looked at Cordelia and she said quietly, "You want to talk about it, honey?" "About what?" "About the Rhodes boy." Cordelia's cheeks went hot. "Mrs. Delaney." "Ruth, I told you. Ruth. Ruth, I am not. There's nothing." "All right, honey. There isn't." "All right, honey. I have too much to do to think about a boy." Ruth Delaney bit into a piece of cornbread. She chewed. She swallowed. She dabbed her mouth with a checkered napkin. She said without looking at Cordelia, "My Silas Delaney was a boy I did not have time to think about, right up until the day I did. And then I thought about him every day for 18 years until he died, and I have thought about him every day for 16 years since." Cordelia said nothing. "I'm not telling you to think about him, Cordelia. I'm telling you that when a good one shows up in your field 3 days a week in the winter, bringing your firewood, you do not have to give him an answer. You just have to notice you noticed him." Cordelia looked down at her hands. Grandpa Ezra's trowel was in her lap. She had been oiling the handle. She said very quietly, "I noticed." Ruth Delaney touched her knee. Just once, just gently. She said, "Good, honey. That's all I wanted to know." By the middle of March, the cottage had a roof. By the end of March, it had doors and windows. By the second week of April, Cordelia moved out of the tent and into the house she had built with her own hands. She swept the flagstone floor. She hung a curtain of blue calico Ruth Delaney had given her over the little window above the sink. She built a fire in the stone hearth Silas Marsh had shown her how to lay. She stood in the middle of her one-room cottage, 20 by 16, loft above, hearth in the west wall, window facing east toward the mountains, so she would see the sun every morning of her life. She stood there, she looked around, and she did not cry. She had cried enough that year. She just very quietly said out loud, "Papa, it is done." The fire crackled. The wind moved past the window, and Cordelia Whitfield laid Grandpa Ezra's trowel on the mantelpiece in the center, in the place of honor, where it was going to stay for the rest of her life. Spring came in a rush. The gorse yellowed with new bloom. The stream fattened with snowmelt. The mountains lost their gray and turned green so fast it was as if they had been holding their breath all winter and someone had finally said, "Now?" Cordelia hired Everett to plow. Bess pulled Jeremiah's old hand plow through the field one long, slow row at a time, and Cordelia walked behind, broadcasting lime from a canvas bag on her hip, and Everett walked ahead guiding Bess by the bridle, and the earth turned up sour and stony and full of promise. They did 4 acres like that in 10 days. At the end of every day, Cordelia was too tired to eat. Everett was too tired to talk. Silas Marsh sat on the doorstep and drank coffee and pronounced the work, "Not bad, girl. Not good either, but not bad." Which was, Cordelia had learned the highest praise Silas Marsh had ever given anyone in his life. At night, she fell into her bed in the loft and she slept the sleep of the just. And she did not for a while think about Elias Grady, except she did, every day. She thought about him every time she looked at the northwest fence line. She thought about him every time she saw a Grady cow, red and white Herefords, grazing in what Everett had confirmed was the wagon meadow. She thought about him every Sunday when she walked into church and Pastor Whitmore's eyes met hers over the pulpit, and she knew he was thinking about it too. She was building. She was proving she could hold what she had. She was giving her father his year. But the trouble came first. The trouble always comes first. It was a Wednesday afternoon in early May. Cordelia was in the kitchen garden, on her knees, setting out cabbage seedlings that Ruth Delaney had started for her in a window box back in March. The sun was warm on the back of her neck. She had rolled her sleeves to the elbow. Grandpa Ezra's trowel was in her right hand. She heard hooves. She did not look up. She thought Everett. Then she thought no, because Bess never came at a canter. She looked up. A gentleman on a bay saddle horse was coming down the track toward her cottage. Black frock coat, silk hat, kid gloves, leather saddlebag, little round wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a beak of a nose. He reined the horse in 10 feet from her garden. He touched the brim of his hat. He said, "Miss Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield." She stood up. She did not brush the dirt from her knees. She said, "Yes." The gentleman smiled. Thin, professional. A smile that had never touched his eyes. He said, "My name is Marcus Prescott. I am an attorney in the town of Ashwood. I have the honor of representing the interests of Mrs. Vivian Adair Whitfield. I believe you know her." The world went very still. Cordelia's hand tightened on the trowel. She thought, not yet, not yet. It's too soon. I'm not ready. She thought, Grandpa, Papa, somebody. She thought, all right, here we go. She said out loud, calm as a pond, "I know her." Marcus Prescott dismounted. He tied his horse to her garden fence post, uninvited, like he owned the post, like he owned the fence, like he owned the girl. He opened his saddlebag. He took out a leather portfolio. He set it on the flat stone at her doorstep. He said, "I wonder if you have a moment." Cordelia said no. He blinked. "I beg your pardon. I do not have a moment. I have cabbage to plant. If you have a document for me, hand it over. If you have a message from Vivian, say it. If you are here to charm me, you should have brought your saddle." He stared at her. For a beat, 2 beats. Then, to his credit, he laughed. Once. Short, surprised. He said, "I see." He took a folded document from the portfolio. He held it out. She took it. She did not look at it. She said, "Speak." Marcus Prescott folded his hands behind his back, rocked once on his heels, looked out over the field, which was greener than it had been in 100 years and probably confused him. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield has instructed me to inform you of an oversight in the administration of your late father's estate." "An oversight?" "Yes." "By whom?" "By yourself, miss." Cordelia said, "Continue." "There is a clause in your father's subsection D. It provides that any parcel of real property bequeathed to a beneficiary who does not remit all applicable property taxes within 12 calendar months of the date of transfer shall revert to the primary estate of the surviving spouse." She waited. He said delicately, "The property tax for this parcel for the fiscal year of 1934 was due on the 15th of April, which was 3 weeks ago." Cordelia's stomach went cold. Because she had put it on the list. She remembered putting it on the list. 5. Pay next year's property tax immediately, 6 months early. She remembered it. She had written it down. She had not done it. She had gotten busy. She had gotten busy with walls and windows and a boy with creekstone eyes and cabbage seedlings. She had missed it. Marcus Prescott saw her face. His thin smile came back. He said softly, "I see you are not aware." Cordelia said she could not speak. Marcus Prescott went on, gentle as a snake in spring grass. "Mrs. Whitfield has authorized me to inform you that under subsection D you have 30 days from today's date, which is the 15th of May, in which to remit all past due property tax, including a substantial late penalty or the parcel reverts, in its entirety, to her." He paused. "You may, of course, also elect the alternative. The alternative. Mrs. Whitfield is a reasonable woman. She has authorized me to accept from you, in lieu of the tax and penalty, a quitclaim deed to the parcel transferring title to her. In exchange, she is prepared to pay you a settlement of $500 to allow you to relocate to a more suitable situation. She has no wish to see you destitute, miss. She only wishes for the family to be at peace." Cordelia looked at him. She looked at his kid gloves. She looked at his silk hat. She thought, "You do not know me. You do not know my father. You do not know Ezra Bellamy. You do not know Ruth Delaney or August Kohler or Silas Marsh or Everett Rhodes. You do not know Pastor Whitmore. You do not know Jeremiah Whitfield, who has been dead 100 years and built a room in the earth for me." She said out loud, "Get off my land." Marcus Prescott's mouth opened. She said, "You have 30 days. So do I. Get off my land, sir, and do not come back until the 30 days are up." He stared at her. He said, Miss Whitfield, like, get off my land. He did, slowly. He untied his horse. He mounted. He touched the brim of his hat with two ironical fingers. He said, Good day, Miss Whitfield. She did not answer him. She watched him ride out. The dust of his horse rose slow and thin behind him and hung in the May sunlight and did not settle for a long time. She sat down on the doorstep. Right where she was standing, she sat down hard, on the flat stone, and she put her face in her hands. And she thought, Oh, Cordelia. Oh, Cordelia. Oh, you fool. She thought one item on a list. That is all it would have taken. And you missed it. She thought, Papa. Papa, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She sat like that for a long time. Then she thought, wait. Then she thought, wait. She lifted her face. She was still crying. But her mind was moving. Because the tax bill was $38. Because the tax bill was $38, and she had 174 gold sovereigns in a locked iron cellar under a stone at the top of the hill. She stood up. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She said out loud to the empty field, Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield, you are a stupid girl. Get up and fix it. She got up. She went inside. She took 2 sovereigns out of the small tin box she kept under the flagstone by the hearth. She put on her good coat. She put on her good hat. She tied her hair back with the ribbon her mother had used on her own wedding day. She walked to the forge. She said, Mr. Kohler, may I borrow Everett and the cart? I need to ride to Jefferson, today, right now. August Kohler looked at her face. He said, Yeah. He shouted for Everett. They drove down out of the mountains. Everett did not ask why. Halfway there, she said, I forgot the tax. He did not say anything. She said, I put it on a list and then I forgot it. Vivian's lawyer came today. There is a clause. If I do not pay the tax and the penalty in 30 days, she gets the land. Everett was quiet. Then he said, Miss Cordelia, may I say something? Yes. You did not forget the tax. I did. You did not forget the tax. You forgot to check the date on the tax. That is a very small kind of forgetting, and it is entirely fixable. She looked at him. He said, still watching the road, You have built a house from a pile of rocks in 5 months. You have not forgotten anything of consequence in your life? Do not let a man in kid gloves make you think you have. She did not answer. She could not. But she watched his profile for a long moment, and she thought unbidden, Ruth Delaney is right. Then she thought, not now, Cordelia. Then she thought, later, Cordelia. Then she looked back at the road. At the Ashe County Tax Assessor's office in Jefferson, she paid $38.72 in tax and $11.20 in late penalty. She got a receipt. She got 2 receipts. She got 3 receipts. She had the county clerk stamp all 3, sign all 3, date all 3. She had put one in an envelope and mailed it that afternoon from the Jefferson post office, addressed to Marcus Prescott, with a note in her own hand. Sir, please advise Mrs. Whitfield that the taxes on the Whitfield's waste parcel are paid in full. She should not expect me to answer any further inquiries. Sincerely, C.A. Whitfield. She put a second receipt in her coat pocket. She gave the 3rd receipt to Everett. He looked at it. He said, Why me? She said, Because if a fire ever burns my cottage down, I would like there to be 3 copies of this piece of paper in 3 different places in 3 different pockets, and I trust yours. Everett tucked the receipt inside his shirt. He said, Yes, ma'am. And they drove back up into the mountains, and the sun set behind them, and the air got cold, and Cordelia did not speak for 2 hours. But she was not sad anymore. She was thinking about Vivian. She was thinking, why now? She was thinking Vivian does not care about $38. Vivian has $10,000. She was thinking Vivian only sends a lawyer when she thinks she is losing something. She was thinking, what has Vivian heard? What does Vivian think is up here? She did not know, but she was going to find out. 2 weeks later, the answer came up the mountain in person. It was a Thursday morning. Cordelia was in the kitchen garden, weeding. Grandpa Ezra's trowel in her right hand, sun on her back, cabbages coming in fat and pale and beautiful. She heard the wagon. She did not look up. Then she thought, wait, because that was not Bess. That was not any wagon she knew. She looked up. A black brougham was coming down her track. 2 matched black horses. A liveried driver. Curtains drawn. Cordelia stood up, Grandpa's trowel in her hand. The carriage stopped 10 feet from her doorstep. The driver climbed down, opened the door, set out a small folding step. And Vivian Adair Whitfield stepped down onto the mud of Cordelia's driveway, alone. No lawyer, no maid, alone. She was wearing black silk, traveling gloves, a hat with a small black feather. She looked exactly the same as she had looked in the parlor at Larkspur Lane, which was Cordelia understood immediately and terribly exactly the point. Vivian looked at Cordelia. Vivian looked at the cabbage garden. Vivian looked at the cottage, every stone of it. Vivian looked at the stacks of building stones sorted and gleaming in the sun. Vivian looked at the 4 acres of green rye rising out of the once worthless field. Vivian did not smile. Vivian did not frown. Vivian gave nothing away. Cordelia said very evenly, "Hello, Vivian." Vivian said, "I found a letter." Cordelia's stomach turned to ice. Vivian said, "In your father's desk. 3 months after he died. In the top left drawer under some old ledgers. It was a draft. Unfinished. Never sent. He must have written it and then thought better and put it aside and never come back to it." Cordelia said nothing. Vivian said, "The letter mentioned a cellar and a map and a debt owed by a family in Ashe County." Cordelia said nothing. Vivian took one step closer. Her heels sank half an inch into the mud. She did not seem to notice. Vivian said in a voice as quiet and reasonable as a bank teller closing a ledger, "I did not come with a lawyer, Cordelia. I did not come with a demand. I came to tell you what is going to happen, because you deserve to know." Cordelia's grip on the trowel was so tight her knuckles ached. Vivian said, "You give me half of what you have found. Half. Not all. I am not a monster. Half of the coin. Half of the acres if you ever manage to recover them. Half. In writing. Notarized within 30 days. She paused. Or I go directly to Elias Grady. I tell him what your father left buried on his boundary. I tell him about the map. I tell him about your intentions. And I let him do to your little cottage what his family did to your great-great-grandfathers." Vivian smiled. For the first time, a small, precise, terrible smile. She said, "You have 30 days, Cordelia." She turned. She got back into her brougham. The driver folded the step, closed the door, climbed to his seat, turned the horses, and Vivian Adair Whitfield rode back down the mountain track without ever looking back. Cordelia stood in her garden with the trowel in her hand. The cabbages green around her feet, the sun bright, the mountains silent. And she understood all at once that her father had not left her a fight against one enemy. He had left her a fight against two. And they had just found out about each other. She stood there a long time. Long enough that Everett, coming up the track with a load of fence posts in the delivery cart, saw her from a quarter mile away and knew something was wrong. He whipped Bess. Bess did not whip well. Bess trotted, however, faster than usual. When Everett pulled up at the cottage, Cordelia was still standing in the cabbage patch. She had not moved. The trowel was still in her hand. Everett climbed down. He said, "Miss Cordelia?" She looked at him. Her face was very white. She said, "Everett, go get Pastor Whitmore, and August Kohler, and Silas Marsh, and Ruth Delaney. Tell them I need them in my cottage, tonight, after supper." He said, "Yes, ma'am." He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I will be." He hesitated. She said, "Go, Everett." He went. That evening, 5 people sat around Cordelia Whitfield's small oak table in her one-room stone cottage. The fire crackled in the hearth. The blue calico curtain moved gently in the evening breeze from the open window. Cordelia stood at the head of the table. Grandpa Ezra's trowel was on the mantelpiece behind her. The tin box with Jeremiah's letter and map was open in front of her. A single tallow candle burned in the center of the table. She looked at each of them. Pastor Whitmore, old and kind. August Kohler, massive and silent. Silas Marsh, small and wiry, his locket under his shirt. Ruth Delaney, round and warm, her hands flat on the tabletop. Everett Rhodes, young and steady, his creekstone eyes on hers. She said, "I owe each of you the truth, tonight, all of it. Because if I don't tell it, you will not know what you are being asked to help me carry." She took a breath. She said, "Everything my father hid up here for me. Everything Jeremiah Whitfield hid up here 75 years ago. Everything Vivian just threatened me over this afternoon. Everything Elias Grady will try to take from me if he finds out. I'm going to tell you now. All of it. Every word." The candle flickered. The wind moved in the eaves, and the 5 people around the table leaned forward to listen. Cordelia told them everything. She started with the day her mother died. She told them about the Finch, about the 11 miles to her grandfather's funeral in the rain, about the parlor at Larkspur Lane, about the deed, about the 6 hours to sundown. She told them about the bus, about the woman with the Bible, about Pastor Whitmore's envelope, about her father's letter. She read the letter out loud, every word. Her voice did not shake. By the time she got to the map, Ruth Delaney was crying without sound. Silas Marsh was staring at his hands. August Kohler had closed his eyes. Pastor Whitmore was nodding slow and steady like a man who had known all of it and was only now hearing it confirmed. Everett Rhodes was looking at Cordelia. Only at her. He had not moved once. She showed them the map. She showed them Jeremiah's letter. She showed them the receipt for the property tax. Then she told them about Vivian, about the brougham, about the draft in the drawer, about the 30 days, about the threat to go to Elias Grady. When she was finished, the candle had burned an inch and a half. The wind had died in the eaves. The fire in the hearth had settled into embers. Nobody spoke for a full minute. Then Silas Marsh said quietly, "Girl." Cordelia looked at him. He said, "You are not alone in this room." That was all he said, but it was enough. Pastor Whitmore spoke first after that. He said, "We have 4 things on our side. Your father saw to 3 of them. God saw to the 4th." Cordelia said, "Tell me." 1. The letter from Jeremiah, written and dated in 1859, preserved in a sealed tin box in a hidden cellar, that is admissible as documentary evidence in any court in this state. 2. The map, drawn in the same hand, dated 1841. It matches to the boundary a certified copy your father lodged with the Ashe County Registrar in October of 1924. That copy has been on file notarized, witnessed, and legally recorded for 10 years. 3. The tax receipt in your pocket. 3 copies of it. You cannot be dispossessed under subsection D. 4. He looked around the table. 4 is us. Ruth Delaney nodded. August Kohler nodded. Silas Marsh nodded. Everett Rhodes did not nod. Everett Rhodes said 5. Cordelia looked at him. He said, "There is a 5th, and it is the one that ends this." She said, "Tell me." Everett Rhodes said, "My grandfather's box." Nobody moved. Cordelia said very quietly, "Everett, no." He said, "Yes." Everett, listen to me. I told you before. I do not want you to. I know. Your grandfather. Your grandfather is your family. Whatever he did or did not do to your father does not change that he is not my family. Everett said it flat. He said, "My family is a dead man in a rented field and a mother with a cough she cannot shake. My family is you and Ruth and Silas and Mr. Kohler and the pastor. My family is the 6 of us sitting at this table. Elias Grady is a name on the fence line." He looked at her, his creekstone eyes. He said, "I will go tomorrow night." He plays cards on Fridays at the Ashwood Inn until midnight. His housekeeper is asleep by 10. His study window on the east side has a broken latch. I have known this since I was 17. Cordelia said, "Everett, there is a box in the bottom drawer of his desk, iron, locked. My mother told me. She saw him put things in it one time when she was 17 years old and still allowed in the house. That box is where he keeps the old papers, the 1867 deed, the ones he does not want in the daylight." Cordelia said, "You cannot break the lock." Everett said, "I do not have to." He reached into his shirt pocket. He took out a small brass key. He set it on the table. He said, "My father had it when he died. It was in a leather pouch around his neck. My mother has kept it in a drawer for 5 years. I took it last month. Because I have known since the day you showed me that map that I was going to use it." The candle flickered. Cordelia stared at the key. She said, "Everett." He said, "I already decided, Cordelia. I decided before you asked. I'm telling you now because I love you, and I am not going to lie to you about where I will be tomorrow night." The word landed. It landed like a stone dropped in a still pond. Cordelia did not move. Ruth Delaney did not move. Nobody moved. Everett Rhodes had not looked away. He said softer, "I know it is not the moment. I know. But I do not go on a job without saying it. Not to you. Not now." Cordelia's mouth opened, closed. She said, and her voice was almost a whisper, "Everett, come back." He said, "I will." He picked up the key. He put it back in his shirt pocket. He stood up from the table. He said, "I need to go home and be with my mother tonight. I will meet Miss Cordelia at the church at 9 tomorrow evening to say I am on my way. And I will meet her at the cottage at first light Saturday morning to show her what I found. Anyone who wants to be at the cottage Saturday at first light, be there." He touched Ruth Delaney on the shoulder as he passed her. He nodded to August Kohler. He nodded to Silas Marsh. He nodded to Pastor Whitmore. He did not touch Cordelia. He walked out the door and closed it quietly behind him. The 4 remaining sat around the candle. Cordelia was breathing very carefully, as if a fast breath would knock her over. Ruth Delaney reached across the table and took her hand. Ruth Delaney said, "Honey." Cordelia said, "I know." Ruth Delaney said, "That is a good young man." Cordelia said, "I know." Silas Marsh said, "Girl." Cordelia looked at him. Silas Marsh said, "He will come back. He was raised by a woman who taught him how to make a promise. He will come back." August Kohler said in his low, steady voice, "Yeah, and if he does not, I will go to Elias Grady's house myself with a hammer." Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. Cordelia lowered her forehead onto Ruth Delaney's hand, and she stayed like that a long time. Friday, the longest day of her life. She could not eat. She could not read. She could not sit still. She weeded her garden 3 times in 6 hours. She oiled Grandpa's trowel 4 times. She swept a floor that did not need sweeping. At sunset, she walked down to Fenwick. At 9, she was at the church. Everett was on the steps. He was wearing dark clothes. His mother's dark clothes cut down, she guessed. He had a small satchel over one shoulder, and he stood up when he saw her. He said, "Cordelia." She said, "Everett." He said, "I am on my way." She said, "I know." He said, I will be at the cottage at first light. She said, I know. She reached into her pocket. She took out the wooden finch, her mother's finch, the little worn, smooth bird she had carried in her pocket for 11 years. She held it out. She said, take her. He said, Cordelia, I cannot. She said, take her, Everett. She has kept me safe since I was 9 years old. She will keep you safe tonight. He took the finch. He closed his hand around it. He looked at her a long moment. Then he said, and his voice was not steady, I will bring her back. She said, you had better. He turned. He walked down the church steps. He did not look back. Cordelia stood on this top step and watched him walk out of Fennec under the street lamp and then past the street lamp and then into the dark. Pastor Whitmore came out of the sanctuary behind her. He put his hand on her shoulder. He said, come inside, child. We will pray until morning. She said, yes. She followed him in. She did not remember later most of what he prayed. She only remembered kneeling at the altar rail for hours, with her hands folded and her eyes closed, and Pastor Whitmore's old voice going on and on beside her, low and steady, and outside the sky, slowly turning gray, and inside her own head, the same three words over and over. Come back, Everett. Come back, Everett. Come back, Everett. At 5:30 in the morning, she walked back up the mountain track. The sky was the color of a robin's egg. The mountains were dark blue against it. She reached the cottage at 6. There was no wagon. There was no Bess. There was no Everett. She sat down on the doorstep stone. She waited. 6:15, 6:30. At 6:45, Bess came around the bend of the track. Cordelia stood up. Everett was walking beside her. Not driving. Walking. His face was bruised. His lip was split. He was holding his ribs with one arm, but his other hand was full. Cordelia ran. She ran the 60 feet from the doorstep to the head of the track. Her boots slipped on the wet grass. She almost fell. She caught herself. She kept running. She threw herself at him. He caught her. He grunted with the pain of it, but he caught her. She said into his shoulder, you, Everett Rhodes, you. He said into her hair, I told you I would come back. She said, your face. He said, I know. She said, your ribs. He said, I know. She said, what happened? He said, 2 of his men were waiting on the way home. I do not know if he knew, or if he just thought he was being cautious. Either way. They caught me at the crossroad. Her breath stopped. He said, but not before I hid the box. He led her down the track, half a mile, to a hollow oak. He knelt at its base. He reached into the hollow. He pulled out the wooden finch first. He handed it to her. He said, she kept me safe. Cordelia's eyes filled. Then he reached in again. He pulled out an iron box, small, heavy, latched. He set it on the ground between them. Hale said, I opened it in his study. I was there 10 minutes. I found the papers. I took them. I put them back in the box. I brought the whole box, because if I only took the papers, he would have known within a day. This way, he will not open the drawer for a week maybe. He will not check the box for longer. He assumes I know nothing. He assumes no one knows about the key. He took the brass key out of his shirt pocket. He set it on top of the box. He said, open it, Cordelia. It is your inheritance. She knelt in the wet grass. She turned the key. The latch clicked. She lifted the lid. Papers. A stack of papers. Yellow with age, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with a black ribbon. Cordelia lifted the stack out. She untied the ribbon. She unfolded the oilcloth. The top document was a bill of sale, dated the 9th of March, 1867, between William Grady of Ashe County and Ephraim Whitfield of the same, for the conveyance of 11 acres, more or less situated on the north and west boundaries of the parcel known as Whitfield's Waste. Sale price, $40. Cordelia stared at it. $40, 11 acres for $40, 2 years after the war, the winter of the burnout, when Whitfields had been eating cornmeal and dandelion greens and bearing children. She turned the page. Underneath was a second document, in Ephraim Whitfield's shaky hand, dated the same day. I, Ephraim Whitfield, do herewith attest that I have this day sold to Mr. William Grady 11 acres of my land. I have done so under duress. Mr. Grady has held the note on my mortgage since November last. He has this day threatened to call the note if I do not sell to him at his price. My children are hungry. I have no choice. May God forgive me, and may my sons remember. This paper is my witness that I did not sell willingly. Ephraim Whitfield, March 9, 1867. Cordelia sat back on her heels. Her hand was shaking. Everett said quietly, read the next one. She turned to the page. Underneath Ephraim's confession was a longer document, the 1867 receipt from the county recorder, filed by William Grady, which entered Ephraim's signature, but not Ephraim's confession, into the official record. The confession had been kept by William Grady in this box, and later when William died in his son's hand, and later still when the son died in Elias's hand for 67 years. because it was proof and they had never dared destroy it. Cordelia looked up. She looked at Everett. She said, "Everett." He said, "Yes." She said, "Your grandfather is not the man who did this. His grandfather was. His father inherited the paper. He inherited it too. And he has kept it locked in a bottom drawer for 51 years. He never spoke of it. He never showed it. But he never burned it either." Everett went very still. He said, "Why?" Cordelia said softly, "Because somewhere inside him, he knew, and he could not bring himself to destroy the truth, even though he would not tell it. He was waiting." Everett said, "For what?" Cordelia said, "For a Whitfield to come back." They stood up. They walked back to the cottage together, the box between them, the Finch in her pocket, Everett limping, the morning sun coming up over the mountains. Ruth Delaney was already at the cottage. So was Pastor Whitmore. So was Silas Marsh. So was August Kohler. They had all been walking up the track at first light. They had all needed to be there. They saw the box. They saw Everett's face. Ruth Delaney sat him down and cleaned his split lip with cold water and pressed a poultice against his ribs and cried the whole time silently and did not say a word. August Kohler read Ephraim Whitfield's confession twice. He set it down. He said quietly, "Yeah, this is enough." Pastor Whitmore said, "This is more than enough." Silas Marsh said, "This is a wall that will not fall." Cordelia said, "Vivian's 30 days end on the 15th of June. She said, "I want a hearing before then." Pastor Whitmore said, "Then we ride to Jefferson on Monday." They rode to Jefferson on Monday. All 6 of them. Ruth Delaney closed the bakery for the day and pinned a note on the door that said, "Gone for justice. Bread tomorrow." August Kohler banked his forge and put a sign that said, "Closed. Family business." Silas Marsh put his good hat on his head and his good boots on his feet and rode in the back of the bakery cart, holding Ephraim's confession in a leather portfolio on his lap. Pastor Whitmore wore his Sunday collar. Everett Rhodes drove Bess moving stiff, still holding his ribs. Cordelia sat beside him in her mother's ribbon and her grandfather's memory and her father's 10-year plan. They filed a petition with the Ashe County Court. The clerk was a small, round man with an ink-stained thumb. He looked at the documents. He looked at Cordelia. He looked at the 6 of them standing in his little office. He said, "Miss, what are you asking the court to consider?" Cordelia said, "3 things. Go ahead. 1, to confirm my ownership of the 4.5 acres known as Whitfield's Waste in the face of a pending claim by my stepmother, Vivian Adair Whitfield, under subsection D of the will of Thaddeus Wingate Whitfield, and to enter into evidence my paid property tax receipt dated the 15th of May. 2, to hear evidence that the 11 acres currently held by Mr. Elias Grady on the north and west boundaries of my parcel were originally part of the Whitfield holding as recorded in the deed of 1841, a certified copy of which was lodged in this office by my father on the 9th of October, 1924, and to hear the testimony of documents recently recovered from the Grady family records. 3, in the event the court finds in my favor on the 11 acres, to petition the court for guidance on the just and charitable distribution of the recovered land. The clerk looked at her. He said, "Miss Whitfield, that last one, that is not a thing people usually ask." Cordelia said, "I know." He said, "Most people just want their land back." Cordelia said, "I want my land back too, but I want to know what to do with it. And I would like the court's blessing on the answer." The clerk stared at her for a long moment. Then he wrote it all down. He said, "The court will hear you on the 12th of June, 9 in the morning. Bring your witnesses." Cordelia said, "Thank you." She turned to go. The clerk said, "Miss." She turned back. He said, "My grandfather knew a Whitfield once." She looked at him. She said, "So you told me, in Fenwick, at your grandfather's store." He said, "Yes, miss. His name was John Prentice. He was the surveyor who drew that map. He passed in 1911. He kept a copy of that map on the wall of his parlor his whole life." My mother did not know why, Cordelia said softly. "I think you know why now." The clerk said, "Yes, miss, I think I do." He held out his hand. She shook it. And then she walked out of the courthouse, with her 5 people behind her, and the June sun bright over Jefferson and a hearing on her calendar in 28 days. Word travels fast in the mountains. By Wednesday, everyone in Fenwick knew. By Thursday, everyone in Ashwood knew. By Friday, every farmer in Ashe County knew. On Saturday morning, a knock came at Cordelia's cottage door. She opened it. A thin woman in a faded gingham dress stood on her step, around 40, sun-weathered face, a basket over one arm, a little girl of maybe 6 holding her other hand. The woman said, "Miss Whitfield." Cordelia said, "Yes." The woman said, "My name is Anna Corbett. I'm the widow of Jeb Corbett, who died in the cave-in at the Grady Limestone Quarry in 1932. This is my daughter, Lucy. I heard what you did. I brought you eggs." She held out the basket. Cordelia looked at the eggs. There were maybe 6 of them, small brown eggs, the kind a small home flock would give in a bad year. She looked at the woman. She looked at the girl. She said, "Please come in." Anna Corbett came in. That was the first. By noon, there had been 3 more knocks. By evening, 9. Widows of quarrymen, sons of tenant farmers, old men who remembered their fathers cursing William Grady's name at supper tables. Every one of them brought something: a jar of jelly, a sack of dried apples, a hand-carved spoon, a single folded piece of paper with a shaky mark of an X and the words, "I will tell what my daddy told me if the court asks." By Sunday night, Cordelia's kitchen table had 8 signed statements on it. By Wednesday, 14. By the following Friday, 21. Not one of them was younger than 50. Every one of them had been waiting. The night before the hearing, Everett walked up to the cottage. His face was almost healed. The bruises were fading yellow-green. His ribs still hurt when he laughed, but he had started laughing again. He knocked at the door. She opened it. He stood on the step holding his hat in his hands. He said, "Cordelia." She said, "Everett." He said, "I did not want to say what I said at that table 2 weeks ago in front of 5 other people. Not the first time. I did not do it right." She said, "Everett." He said, "Let me finish. I said it because I did not know if I would come back. If I had known I would come back, I would have waited. I would have picked a Sunday afternoon. I would have walked you along the creek. I would have said it right." She said, "Everett." He said, "So I am picking a Sunday, this Sunday, if the hearing goes right, and if you will still have me after the hearing goes right, I would like to walk you along the creek." And say it again, the way I meant to. She said, "Everett." He said, "What?" She said, "You already said it right, the first time." He said, "Oh." She said, "You are not a man who says things wrong, Everett Rhodes. I do not think you have said one wrong thing since I met you." He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "But yes, Sunday. Walk me by the creek, please." His whole face changed, just a little, just enough. He put his hat back on. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He walked off down the track in the dusk. Cordelia stood in her doorway a long time. She was smiling. She had not realized her face could still do that. The hearing was held in the Ashe County Courthouse. The courtroom was small, whitewashed. A single high window on the east wall. Wooden benches. A judge's bench at the front worn smooth by 50 years of country cases. The judge was Judge Harlan Whitaker, 65, gray. Slow to speak, fair folks said. Not fast, not fancy, fair. Vivian was in the front bench on one side, Marcus Prescott beside her in his kid gloves, her face perfect and pale as a china plate. Elias Grady was in the front bench on the other side. 78 years old. Small, white-haired. His eyes were hooded. His mouth was set. He did not look at Everett. He did not look at Cordelia. He looked only at the iron box in the clerk's hands, his father's box, his grandfather's box. He looked at it, and Cordelia, watching him, understood again that she had been right. He had been waiting for it, too. He had just not known. Cordelia sat between Pastor Whitmore and Ruth Delaney. Everett was directly behind her. Behind Everett stood 21 people from Ashe County, widows, sons, old farmers. They stood in the aisle because there were not enough benches. They stood in the aisle because they had come to be counted. Judge Whitaker looked at the room. He said, "Well, I do not think I have seen this many folks in this room since the tobacco tax hearings of 1922. He said, "Somebody had better tell me why." Cordelia stood up. She said, "May it please the court, my name is Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield. I would like to tell the court a story that begins in 1841 and ends today." Judge Whitaker looked at her. He said, "Miss Whitfield, take your time." She took her time. She spoke for 1 hour. She laid out Jeremiah's deed. She laid out her father's forced certified copy. She laid out the property tax receipt. She laid out Ephraim's confession from the iron box. She did not raise her voice. She did not speak like a lawyer. She spoke like a granddaughter. She spoke like Ezra Bellamy's granddaughter, who knew that when you were laying an argument on a table, you laid each piece with care in its proper place, with its best face turned to the light. When she was done, she said, "I am not asking this court to punish Mr. Elias Grady. His grandfather did what he did. His father kept the paper. Mr. Grady inherited the result. I am asking this court to recognize that a document exists, signed by my ancestor, that says the sale of 1867 was not willingly made." She said, "And I am asking this court, if it finds in my favor, to allow me to do something with the recovered acres that the Grady family did not do, to give some of them to families whose lives were broken by that same taking." She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Elias Grady had not moved during her entire hour. Marcus Prescott stood up. He argued at length about statutes of limitation, about the admissibility of documents recovered by, he chose the word, carefully irregular means, about the reliability of a confession attested by a man who was, he pointed out, financially distressed at the time. Judge Whitaker listened. When Marcus Prescott was done, the judge said, "Counselor, sit down." Marcus Prescott sat down. The judge looked at Elias Grady. He said, "Mr. Grady, do you wish to speak?" For a very long moment, Elias Grady did not move. Then he stood up, slowly. He was smaller than he had looked sitting down. He looked at Cordelia for the first time. He said in a voice like an old barn door on a windy day. That box has been in the bottom drawer of my desk for 51 years. My father put it there when I was 27. He told me what was in it. He told me to keep it. He told me to never open it. He told me that if a Whitfield ever came for it, to let them have it. The courtroom did not breathe. Elias Grady said, I did not think one ever would. He looked at Everett. Just for a second. He said, grandson. Everett stood up. Elias Grady said, you did what you were supposed to do. I'm not angry. He sat down. The courtroom exhaled. Judge Whittaker sat very still. Then he said, I'm going to recess for 30 minutes. When I come back, I will rule. He came back in 22 minutes. He said, on the matter of the tax question raised under subsection D of the will of Thaddeus Wingate Whitfield. The taxes have been paid. Documentation is in order. The claim is denied. Miss Whitfield's title to Whitfield's waste is confirmed absolutely. Vivian did not move. Judge Whittaker said, on the matter of the 11 acres, I find based on the certified deed of 1841, the sworn confession of Ephraim Whitfield of 1867, and the acknowledgement by Mr. Elias Grady in open court that the sale of 1867 was not willingly made and constitutes a taking that this court cannot let stand. Title to the 11 acres in question is hereby returned to Miss Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield. The courtroom began to buzz. Judge Whittaker rapped his gavel. He said, not done. The room went silent. He said, on the matter of the disposition of the recovered acres, Miss Whitfield has asked this court for guidance. I'm not going to give her guidance. I'm going to give her authority. Miss Whitfield, you have petitioned this court for permission to convey some portion of the recovered land to families in need. I hereby grant you full and unencumbered authority to do so at your discretion. This court will register any such conveyance without cost. He looked at her over his spectacles. He said, do not disappoint me, young lady. Cordelia stood up. She said, no, sir. He said, this court is adjourned. The 21 people behind Everett Rhodes did not cheer. They wept, every one of them. They wept without sound, and they held each other's hands, and they wept. Outside the courthouse, the June sun was bright. Vivian came down the steps. Alone, Marcus Prescott had walked ahead of her, was already at the carriage. Vivian stopped one step above Cordelia. She looked down at her. Her face did not do anything at first. Then it did. Something in it gave way. Not all at once, piece by piece, like a wall of dry mortar deciding finally to lean. Vivian said quietly, he loved you more than I knew. Cordelia looked at her. She said, he loved you too, Vivian. Vivian said, do not. Cordelia said, he did. I read the letter. He wrote, my dearest Cordelia. But he did not write Vivian, damn her. Do you know what he wrote about you? Vivian did not move. Cordelia said, he wrote, I could not free my house from her hand. Not I hate her hand, not I curse her hand, just I could not free. That is a man who tried. That is a man who wanted to. That is a man who was still somehow hoping. Vivian's eyes were wet. Cordelia said, he hoped for you. Until the end. I do not know if you deserved it. I do not know if you deserve it now. I just know he did. Vivian said nothing. Cordelia said, go home, Vivian. Vivian went. She got into her carriage. The carriage rolled away. Cordelia stood on the courthouse steps in the June sun with her people around her and watched it go. She did not in that moment forgive her stepmother. She was not ready. She might never be. But she had planted the seed of it, in her mother's memory, in her father's honor, and she left it there, for the mountains to water in their own time. She did what she had told the court she would. Of the 11 recovered acres, she kept 3, the 3 closest to her cottage. The 3 where the old foundation of Ephraim Whitfield's original homestead still stood in the ground. She would build a barn there someday. She would plant an orchard. The other 8 acres she gave away. 3 acres to Anna Corbett and her daughter Lucy. 2 acres to a family of 4 children whose father had died in the quarry. 1 acre to a widow named Prudence Cole who had walked 7 miles to sign a statement. 1 acre to a young couple named Blackwell who had lost their farm to Grady's Bank in 1931. The last acre, 1 full acre of good tillable ground on the west slope, she signed over to Everett Rhodes's mother. Everett tried to refuse. She said, Everett, your grandfather cut your father off from marrying her. This land is on his old boundary. Do you understand what this means? He said, I understand. She said, then take it. He took it. They took the papers to the courthouse together. Judge Harlan Whittaker registered every conveyance. He did not charge Cordelia $1. He said only, well done, young lady. That was all. That was enough. Sunday. The Sunday after the hearing. Cordelia went to church. She sat in the front pew on the aisle in the seat Pastor Whitmore had, without asking, marked as hers. Everett sat beside her, his arm brushing her sleeve. Behind her in the pews and standing in the aisles were more people than the small Methodist church of Fenwick had held in 20 years. Pastor Whitmore climbed the pulpit steps. He read his text. He read it slow. He read it loud. the stone which the builders refused. The same has become the head of the corner. He looked up. He looked at Cordelia. He said, "This is a story about a stone." He said, "About a piece of ground that no one wanted." He said, "About what happens when we look again at what was thrown away." He preached for 20 minutes. He did not use Cordelia's name once. He did not have to. Every person in the church knew. When the last hymn was sung and the last blessing given, Cordelia and Everett walked out into the churchyard together. He held out his hand. She took it. He walked her out past the old cemetery, down the little path that led to the creek behind the church, along the water, in the June sun. Neither of them said much. They did not have to. When they came to a flat stone by the bank, they sat down on it. He took her hand. He said, "I said it once already. I'm going to say it again, and I will say it every day I get for the rest of my life, if you let me." He said, "I love you, Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield." She said, "I know." He said, "Do you love me back?" She said, "I do." He said, "Would you consider marrying me someday, when you are ready?" She said, "I would." He said, "That is enough for me, for now." She said, "For now." She rested her head on his shoulder. The creek moved past them. Somewhere upstream, a crow called. Sharp, clean, once. Cordelia smiled. She said, "Grandpa is watching." Everett said, "Which one?" She said, "Both." 1 year later, June again. Cordelia stood in the middle of her field. The wheat was up, not tall yet, not ready, but rising steady green as glass rippling in the wind that came up the mountains from the south. Behind her, the cottage, blue calico curtain in the window, smoke rising steady from the chimney, Grandpa Ezra's trowel on the mantelpiece where it would live for the rest of her life. Beside her, Everett was mending the west fence line. Above her, the sky was clean. She held the wooden finch in her palm. She looked down at it. Her mother's hands had carved into it long before Cordelia was born. Her mother's hands had passed it to her at 9 years old. Her mother's hands had told her to look for God in the dirt. Cordelia looked at the dirt. She looked at the wheat. She looked at the mountains. She looked at the young man on the fence. She looked at the cottage she had built with her own 2 hands from a pile of rocks a stepmother had thrown at her in cold silence. She thought I was not waste. She thought I was seed. She whispered it out loud into the June wind so quiet that only her mother, if her mother was listening, could hear. I was seed. The wheat moved. The wind moved. Somewhere down by the sluggish stream, the crow called once, sharp, clean. And Cordelia Adelaide Whitfield, 21 years old, with an inheritance she had earned twice over, put the finch back in her pocket, picked up her grandfather's trowel from the doorstep, and went to work. Because the day was long. Because the field was hers. Because the stone that the builders had refused had become the head of the corner. And because tomorrow, the Lord willing, there was more to build.